Don't miss Good American Family.
We have a little girl here for adoption. She has dwarfism.
Starring Ellen Pompeo and Mark Duplass.
Something is off.
She's just a little girl. You think she's faking?
She has adult teeth. There are signs of puberty.
Inspired by the shocking stories that tore a family apart.
I don't know what's going on.
How old are you? You should get a lawyer. You have no idea how those people hurt this girl.
The Hulu original series, Good American Family. New episodes Wednesdays, streaming on Hulu.
Bombas makes the most comfortable socks, underwear, and T-shirts.
Warning, Bombas are so absurdly comfortable you may throw out all your other clothes.
Sorry, do we legally have to say that?
No, this is just how I talk, and I really love my Bombas.
They do feel that good. And they do good, too. One item purchased equals one item donated.
To feel good and do good, go to bombas.com/Wondery and use code Wondery for 20% off your first purchase. That's BOMBAS.com/Wondery and use code Wondery at checkout.
Mochi Health is here to help you start your weight loss journey with caring, personalized support. Meet one-on-one with board-certified obesity doctors and registered dietitians who truly listen and understand your unique needs. Eligible patients can access affordable GLP-1 medications delivered right to their door each month. No insurance? No problem. Mochi Health accepts FSA and HSA, making care accessible and affordable. And with 24/7 customer service, you'll never feel alone on your path to better health. Get started with Mochi Health today. Take the free quiz at joinmochi.com and use code AUDIO40 at checkout for $40 off your first month of membership. That's joinmochi.com with promo code AUDIO40.
This week, we had 2 episodes where I interviewed AJ Daulerio of the Smallbow newsletter and podcast. AJ and I share a lot in common. We're sort of kindred spirits in that we were both a part of massive journalism scandals, both are in substance abuse recovery, and both have made our way into spaces where we've become more dedicated to helping people. Any important part of going through any life crisis that involves shame is to humble yourself and recognize that your flaws are not sui generis. We talk in this episode that appeared on the Smallbow podcast about recognizing how if you get enough people in a room, there's probably at least one murderer, and how humility that comes from that can unlock our ability to forgive ourselves and dedicate ourselves to helping others. What's different about this episode than the 2 I did with AJ is you get to see some insight into how I was shaped into the person I am today. I want to thank AJ for being generous enough to allow me to share this episode with you. I hope you enjoy it and check out his podcast and newspaper. This is a Silver Linings Handbook bonus episode. I'm Jason Blair.
My shoulder for you to lean on when everything is going wrong. And here's my
Hello and welcome to the Smallbow Podcast. We're a podcast trying to expand the definition of recovery, where we talk to interesting people about sobriety, mental illness, or the trouble with love, sex, food, debt, inadequacy, loneliness, and today, humility, shame, and journalism, I guess. Our guest is former New York Times reporter, current life coach, and rejuvenated journalist, Jason Blair. In 2003, Jason was a 27-year-old New York Times reporter who caused a massive plagiarism scandal that knocked the venerated publication back on its heels. In his 4 years as a reporter at the Times, Jason wrote more than 600 articles. And he was promoted to the national desk, and that's when Jason really began to lie more frequently. Here's a quote from the May 11, 2003 issue of the New York Times from their story about the scandal at their own paper. Quote, in an inquiry focused on correcting the record and explaining how such fraud could have been sustained within the ranks of the Times journalist has so far uncovered new problems in at least 36 of the 73 articles Mr. Blair wrote since he started getting national reporting assignments. And here's my favorite quote. In the final months The audacity of the deceptions grew by the week, suggesting the work of a troubled young man veering toward professional self-destruction. I think that sentence was unnecessary. Seriously, do you know how many bugging journalists are troubled young men? Help them. I digress. I will put some of the articles about the scandal in the show notes because I know many of you are not old enough to remember this or missed it the first time around, but it was a huge story. And if you were a working journalist in the early 2000s, even a decade after that, you know about Jason Blair. And I'm sure there are still many who have not forgiven him for his crimes against the Fourth Estate. He understands that, and his remorse for betraying and undermining the industry which he loves, and especially his co-workers whose reputations and nervous systems were also deeply affected by what he'd done. It should be noted that Jason was in recovery for drugs and alcohol before all this stuff happened. He was a few months sober during the Times scandal. After he resigned from the Times, he was feeling suicidal, so he eventually checked into Silver Hill Hospital in New Canaan, Connecticut. I know a couple people who went there. There, he was diagnosed as bipolar. Soon after he left the hospital, he went back home to Virginia, wrote a memoir, one he deeply regrets, which we also talk about. He then started a support group for people with bipolar disorder. In the past decade, Jason has really begun to use his experiences to help others dealing with shame, including myself. So on that note, here is Jason Blair. Thanks for joining me again.
Oh, of course, man.
4 years, I think, since we last
something
spoke.
like that. Yep.
Do you know Audie Cornish from CNN at all?
Yeah. Oh.
She sent me a very lovely email about how much she loved the interview that we did the first time and that she was interested in speaking to you at some point.
Anytime.
So, and I told her that I was speaking to you again for the podcast, and she's like, well, you got to him before I did. But so I'm like, I don't think it's going to overlap at all in any ways. So you're free to do that as well. Just letting you know.
Thanks.
Yeah. Did you read the last post I did about this? Did you read the interview or the...
I can't even remember.
Okay.
I cannot even remember if I did.
So I did the intro, and before we did the written email, we spoke, right?
Yep.
And you told me this anecdote that I have carried with me and retold several times, probably almost like apocryphally at this point. And I don't even remember if it's true, but I've assigned it to you. So,
well, you got it pretty right. It is something that I've said. And did I tell you the story about how? So around, I don't know, 2023, October of 2023, my mom died.
Oh, I'm sorry.
And yeah, of course. And Christmas was her thing. That was her big thing. So last year we decided we're not going to do any Christmas celebration. We're just going to give our love to each other. And over the Christmas holidays, or it may have been the beginning of the year, my brother sends us this link to your podcast, and he's like, you got to go to minute X, Y, or Z and hear this story. And I was like, the guy got it 100% right, but...
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Good. Okay,
yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
All right. No, because I mean, I just think that is such an amazing lesson in humility, right? That many people, I think, facing, and I've told it to people who are mostly in AA, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that go into it, especially those of us who do carry shame, especially public shame, who go into it thinking that everybody's going to know who they are. Yep. Everybody's going to see them in the ways that they see themselves. And anyway, I think for our listeners, we should probably have you tell this just in case.
I'm going to give it to you, and then I'm going to give you my reaction to you saying it on the podcast, because I think it was very interesting for me. And it tells you something about, in my mind, giving people your time. You never know which part is going to hit them.
Right.
So the story I think you're referring to has to do with, coming out of the scandal, my scandal at the New York Times. There was a lot of shame. And it was like tough to even go to AA meetings, not just because Times people were going to be there, but during that time, I could walk down the street and get recognized, right?
Right.
So, for me, in my mind, I'm the center of everybody's universe at this moment. And all the world is blaring at me. Looking in retrospect, they were probably walking by thinking, is that crazy dude? And then not giving it a thought after that. And like you said, like one of the things that I think I learned in rehab that was really important was the difference between shame and guilt.
Yeah.
Going back and feeling a sense of guilt and reflecting on your past mistakes and moving forward can be a powerful tool. That's how we learn and we grow. Like if you think about like maybe thinking about it this way, think about the people 5 qualities about yourself that they would believe, whether you believe it or not, are your strongest or most important qualities to their life. And I bet they're born all in your mistakes.
Yeah.
But there's a danger in that transforming into shame. And, shame is that idea that I made a mistake, as opposed to I made a mistake and I'm a human and I made a mistake. It's I made a mistake and this is who I am.
Yeah.
And so during that whole period, I remember I was really struggling and I was telling this friend, like, I'm not going to go to meetings. I'm not going to X, Y, or Z. And she turned to me and she said, very supportive friend, journalist too. She said, Jason, you need to get off the cross. We need the wood. Right? And in that particular moment for me, among many different moments from her wisdom, was, like I am not the center of the universe, and I am not the world is not revolving around me, nor is it judging me. And now we need to find a way to take what you've been through and turn it into a measure of service.
Right.
And if you look at the arc, right? So that comment probably came in 2003 or early 2004. That principle has propelled me since those words. And it's just the power of how like one person who cares about you tells you some tough love thing, right? And it propels you. But okay. And in this moment, right, where I'm bemoaning the world around me, and there were 2 particular meetings that I did not want to go to. One on the Upper East Side where a really well-known journalist was in that meeting, and then another meeting where a lot of people from, the newspaper business went. But those are the 2 best meetings for me. One was like a large group and you really got a lot out of it. The other one was a much smaller group, intimate group. And they were, since I had gotten sober, the most impactful meetings for me. And she turns to me, same person, and she says, Jason, you get 100 alcoholics together and you're going to have 1 murderer in the room. And it's true. Did I ever tell you the other part of it, that there was one? Oh, yeah. So I did not hear him qualified. But years later, I go back to the downtown meeting that I really liked. And I'm telling this story about how she said there's at least 1 murderer in the room. And one of the people's like, oh, yeah, there was this priest a couple of years ago. I'm like, this priest? I'm like, what are you talking about? We have priest serial killer? And she was like, no. He told the story about getting into a vehicular crash and killing someone.
Right.
And, originally the story, I think, it humbled me. But then to go back and hear that story, keep it in perspective. Like one of the things that my therapist used to say to me years later was like, I would come in and I'd be like, I did this, I did that. And I would just beat the living crap out of myself. And he would say, well, look, and he wasn't being flippant. Is anybody dead? And if no one's dead, you can do something about it. It doesn't mean that you can like bring things back to the way they were before, but you can do something out of that, whether it's like growing and helping someone else through it or repairing somebody else's hurt or the person you've hurt. And I think those like 3 stories, hey, get off the cross and need the wood, there's a murderer in the room, and is anybody dead? have probably been some of the most powerful and impactful moments for me. So when I heard you tell the murderer story, I thought, out of all the things I could have said to this dude, that's the one that stuck.
But it's in the context of remembering when I started to go to AA early on in Florida during the height of the Hogan trial, feeling like everyone in the room knew who I was, what I was there, and that I was basically going to be shunned for whatever at that point. Just feeling that, and I think I still felt that, and that's why that story meant so much to me. Where it was just like I went into recovery, I think a little differently, knowing just like, okay, how to keep this in perspective.
Yeah.
I'm there for other people. I'm not there to kind of perform. Not everyone's there to basically kind of just look and judge me, right? And those are the things that I think are part of the shame that I had carried around with me always, but also part of kind of my insecurity and how I would react in certain situations, right? Like my default would be just to joke around, be self-deprecating, things along those lines, right? So that's why it became somewhat important for me to kind of carry into every single meeting I have, and also just pass along to other people who may have been in similar situations that we were in a public realm, that they are not the most important person in the room. Not everyone's thinking about them. Even if they are, it's still...
Yeah. Well, and I don't know that it's just out of your insecurities or your past ways of thinking. I think whenever anyone goes through anything in life that causes them shame, just think about how heavy that is and hard that is. And so even your most confident person or your more secure person going through shame feels so unbelievably vulnerable and so bad about it. So why wouldn't everyone else dislike you as much as you dislike yourself in that moment? But the reality, like you're saying, is, most of them are focused on very different things, or they see you very differently.
Right.
One of the things that stuck out to me in talking to you and also emailing with you and then listening to that episode, I was moved by the idea that words that I had said, not even thinking like that, had that powerful impact on your life. That I was moved by that. But also in listening to you talk about those things and talk in those moments, I think there's something that's very relatable to anyone. In your shame, you saw yourself in a way that the rest of the world, as a member of the rest of the world at the time, did not see you. You saw the biggest mistake that you made in that situation. I think the vast majority of people didn't even recognize, maybe like in a narrow group of the journalism world, didn't recognize it. And it's not that we do things for other people. It's really important how we feel about what we did. But I felt like you would let the entire profession down. And I don't think that was the universal view. But
I just remember it was something that I was thinking about constantly, right? In a very stifling way, right?
Yeah.
Where, especially in the first year to 18 months, where until this is resolved publicly, and I'm out of like legal jail and employable, and then I can start to be happy. Then I can start to have some sort of self-confidence, but not until all this other stuff was resolved. And I'd spoken to another friend of mine who was going through, not as big as anything that you or I had gone through, but something similar to where he was like kind of preoccupied with it. And it did involve like, lawyers and I said to him, just like the biggest mistake that I made during that whole period was that I didn't live my life, that I put my entire life on hold because I thought that needed to be resolved before I could go to the beach. I could go enjoy. I could receive presents for Christmas. It was everything was on hold. And I said, that was the biggest mistake that I made. And you should continue to live your life and the rest will take care of itself. Right.
Yeah.
If you could do one thing this year that could help you lose up to 20 to 30 pounds without lifting a single weight and it would actually be good for you, would you do it? And if it would actually improve your health and digestion and it tastes like a chocolate shake, wouldn't that be the ultimate win? Well, here it is. It's called Shakeology, packed with vital nutrients, protein, probiotics, adaptogens, and superfoods. It's the easiest way to reset your nutrition, curb cravings, and feel incredible, all in under the 2 minutes it takes to make a simple shake. No meal prep, no guesswork, just a smarter way to fuel your body and start feeling your best. Shakeology isn't just a shake. It's a lifestyle upgrade that makes healthy living easy, delicious, and totally doable. Shakeology is all your vital nutrition made simple. You can get free shipping, big discounts, and a free shaker cup when you subscribe at Shakeology.com. That's Shakeology.com.
Calling all dog owners. Your furry friend deserves top-notch nourishment, and Ollie delivers the clean, fresh nutrition your dog needs in 5 flavors they'll absolutely flip over. Ollie is made in U.S. kitchens with ingredients carefully sourced from trusted growers and producers around the world, with absolutely no harmful fillers or preservatives. With protein-first recipes like fresh beef with sweet potatoes, fresh turkey with blueberries, or fresh lamb with cranberries, you might start thinking, dang, my dog eats better than I do. And that's probably true when it comes to Ollie. Give your pup a fresh start this new year by letting them taste test a personalized meal plan with Ollie. Head to ollie.com/Wondery. Tell them all about your dog and use code WONDERY to get 60% off your first box of meals when you subscribe today. Plus, they offer a clean bowl guarantee on the first box. So if you're not completely satisfied, you'll get your money back. That's OLLIE.com/Wondery and enter code WONDERY to get 60% off your first box. Start your dog's new year off right with Ollie. Start your dog's new year off right with Ollie.
Are you feeling stuck in your career or lacking employment at the moment? Experiencing symptoms of job dissatisfaction? You might be suffering from a common condition known as career stagnation. But don't worry, there's a solution. Monster.com. Monster.com offers a comprehensive suite of career-boosting tools designed just for you. Our free resume review and AI interview prep tool will help you stand out from the crowd. Need more guidance? Dive into our career advice articles for expert tips and insights. And don't forget to check out our salary tools to ensure you're getting paid what you're worth. Side effects may include a new job, increased confidence, and a brighter future. Consult Monster.com today and take the first step towards your new career. Ready for your next job opportunity? Visit Monster.com now.
And what I find, though, I think about my work in coaching and going into coaching. And one of the things I remember when I got into coaching, I was really nervous because I was like, they're going to know who I am.
Yeah.
Right? It wasn't rare, maybe 1 in 10, maybe a family member knew, but 1 in 10. And then I would often find that that was the reason they were coming.
Interesting.
And so, I thought, okay, is this a celebrity thing? But what I found, and I can remember this moment sitting in the office where one of my clients brings up my past and she starts talking about it. And she says, and that's why I came to see you, because I knew you wouldn't judge me.
Right. That's exactly right. Because I don't know if you have this similar thing, but I think you do. But when anyone... And I feel like I can smell it on people that how they're feeling about themselves in ways similar to how I felt. I run to them. I'm just call me. We can talk through this. And I have a plan for at least them to A, not kill themselves.
Right.
B, not feel like that their world is over or they'll never write, report, whatever again. Right. And that's a powerful skill to have, right? That is the reason I think that it was so important for me to have gone through that, and it's to just kind of help others feel better about themselves in something as extreme or something similar.
Yeah. And I think for a lot of people, what I've found over time is what you and I would consider, huge public scandals. That the difference between that and a more private scandal, let's say one that happens in your family,
Sure.
It's not all that different, because for you, when it's happening in your family, let's say you cheat on your wife or something like that, everyone who's important finds out about it and you feel judged. And the reason why, even when the group gets smaller and smaller, it's still heavy, is because the one person judging you is probably you. And I think that a lot of what happened in your story and a lot of what happened in my story, when you think about shame and growth, I think a lot of people could get something very good at it in whatever mistake they're sitting in right now. And to your point, look, my experience has filled my tool belt with a bunch of different tools that can help people. And that's why when you reached out to me, I would never say no. I wouldn't have mattered who you were or wouldn't have mattered what you had done.
Yeah.
I would have been there.
Interesting. Because I do say no a lot to some people who want to talk to me, mostly reporters who want to talk about the Gawker trial, and not necessarily me, but want to talk about.
Now, journalists, I will say no to.
Okay, got it. Yeah, there you go.
You want to talk? No, but if you're a journalist and you want to talk to me about your pain,
sure,
and how I can help,
then
yes.
we're both on the same page.
Right?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, because I had found that I always get defensive in ways that I don't feel in normal life anymore, but I'm almost trying to kind of protect. Latest example is I think there was like either the business reporter or the law reporter for the New York Times was doing a book about, First Amendment law being under attack and recent cases along those lines. And, he came to me asking for an interview. And I said yes at first, because in that day I was like feeling like, oh, I can handle this. I'll be able to. And he also said the magic words, kind of just like on background. Just want like, and I thought I would be able to handle it. Right. And an hour and a half later, being on the phone with this guy, recognizing that he hadn't asked a question in probably 25 minutes. And it was just me.
Wow.
Spitting out. And I was in this back area of our house, and my 5-year-old is knocking on the door for me, was completely oblivious to that. I was like, this is why I can't talk about this, right? With people who I feel are judging me or attacking me and stuff like that. And because I don't like to feel that.
Or using, right? Like, because that's a part of it. Like, one of the things that I'll admit about journalism is that I say this because I do think it's an inherently altruistic business. The vast majority of people in journalism are trying to help people. It's also an inherently manipulative business.
Okay.
Because we have to get to know people really quickly, very quickly identify what motivates them, make them feel comfortable. And by manipulate, I don't mean negatively. I don't mean to say that in a pejorative sense. Sure. I mean in the sense that manipulate simply means to move. And sometimes when we're moving people so they will talk to us, we're moving them into a bad place for themselves or an unsafe place for themselves. So it's very interesting. So there was a period of time for me where I was very much like that. Like, any journalist who called me to talk about the New York Times, you can go jump off a cliff.
Sure.
And I think that started to evolve as the journalist calls came in two different fashions. One, as I moved into life coaching and they wanted to talk about like helping people and that kind of stuff, I might consider it depending on who it was. But when people would call me about other journalists who ended up in a scandal, I started taking those calls because I felt some voice in this world of journalism covering journalism needs to have a measure of compassion toward this person. And so that became my general exception to the rule. Now, I will go on and talk with people who have done me a solid over the years. So that's another exception.
What is a definition of a solid?
Well, so like, there's examples of Rosemary Armao. who her sister Joanne Armao probably would hang me from the side of the building if she could. Joanne was the Washington Post Metro editor when I was covering the sniper shooting. So her reporters were running around chasing me. And Rosemary was actually a teacher she was a professor at the University of Albany, journalism professor. And very early into my recovery, so like 2 years in, she reached out and she was like, I would love for you to talk to my class. I think this could be therapeutic for you, insightful for them. She brought me up. I spoke to her classes several times. I could tell what kind of person she was and that she cared more about the human side of the story. So when she asked me to be on her podcast, I don't know, 2 years ago, I was like, sure, But it has a lot to do with what my perception of where the person's heart is coming from, if that makes sense.
Right.
I mean, I can't tell ultimately, but like you said, you can smell probably by now a bad actor a million miles away.
Well, I can smell someone in pain, I think, more than that. I mean, that's really like people that are feeling completely burdened by some sort of mistake that they've held on to. That's what I really smell on people. I call it that we share the same limp, and I can see the limp, right?
Yeah.
I'm doing my first journalism class appearance in a couple weeks. Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah. And I know the guy who runs the class, so I feel a sense of safety with it. But I don't know what's going to come out of my mouth, really. I feel like I'll be okay, and I do always. The first thing I want to get out of the way is that I know probably less about this case than you do at this point.
Well, inherently, you know less about the case because no matter how much you read about it, you are blinded by your own personal experience. And I've said this to people for years. I've said every time I go to talk to a journalism class, because that is an absolute exception for me, I will talk to journalism classes in high schools, colleges, wherever, as long as we can keep it somewhat low key. I will talk to them because I feel, whether this is right or wrong, I feel like it's my penance to help, one, the profession be better. And I feel like it is a gift that I've been given that people feel like they can have conversations with me and learn from me so they don't fall down the same slopes I did. I feel like those are two really, really important things.
Yeah.
And I think increasingly in the journalism profession, I did talk to some students in an NPR program at the beginning of last year. I walked out of it, I don't know, hour and a half, 2-hour conversation being absolutely concerned about all their mental health. So these were like Washington folks who are covering big things. And I see the same thing when I'm in classrooms, but I tell them always, every time I go and I talk in a classroom and I take your questions, I learn something new about my story every time.
Okay.
Because I am so blinded by my narrow view.
Yeah, I had this interesting moment 2-3 months ago. I began talking with another she's a current journalist, but in the middle of just, not working, left her job. And somewhat colleagues, I would say in some ways, but she had asked me, and she wasn't trying to ask me on the record or ask me as like a pointed question. She was genuinely curious. Just like, can you tell me what was the thing that you learned the most from that experience through Gawker, through going through that trial? And again, this is coming up on a decade now, and I've talked about this endlessly and thought about this endlessly. And I gave an answer that was completely dishonest. Like, I felt like I needed something more than I had. I felt like I needed something profound or that was life-changing that I was going to pass along to her. That was a lesson. And the true answer was, I don't know. Right?
Well, And I will tell you, that's another thing. There are times when I get in front of these classes where the answer to the question is, I have no idea.
Okay.
I have absolutely no idea. I need to think about that, or even asking them for what their different thoughts are on it.
Yeah.
That's part of where like the learning and growing really truly comes from.
Right.
And you know, it's funny, AJ, you mentioned you felt like you had to say something profound. I can't tell you the number of times I feel that pressure. And you know, let's say 99% of the time, like I give them what the honest answer is in my head right now. But never be afraid to go back to somebody and say, hey man, I just lied to you and I lied to myself, or I didn't lie to myself, I lied to you.
I did. I sent that exact email right afterwards. I told her, I was just like, I don't know why I said what I said. Well, I do, but here's the truth is I don't know. And I felt almost bad and embarrassed with the fact that I don't know the answer at this moment in my life. Maybe I will later on. And maybe if I think about it a little bit more. But, you know, as of now, I'm still processing it. And I think that that's the best place to be. Honestly.
Yeah.
I mean, you know.
And I don't think you're ever going to know the answer because to me, the answers evolve over time. Like, I really think it took me about 7 years to have any reliable answers. But in those moments, it was like looking out into an ocean or a pond, and I could see answers, but only at the surface.
Okay.
And then over time, I get deeper and deeper into the water, and maybe I can see, let's say, I don't know, a rock at the bottom. But then all of a sudden, a gust of water comes and pushes it away, and this context changes, and I learned something new. So I don't think there's ever the answer.
Yeah.
It reminds me of what you were talking about before, by the way, where you said, like, you felt like you couldn't live your life. I hope you don't feel like you can't live your life until you get the answer.
Oh, no. I'm 100% living my life now. I'm trying to, I would probably say I'm 80% better than I was at the onset of whatever sort of public thing that I was going through. There's still stuff there for sure. I recognize and I can say it out loud and identify it, and at least what the emotion is, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you know, I talk to a lot of people. One person who has been very important to me has been James Fry, in terms of just like, you know,
he's on my list of people I must talk to.
He was the guy who told
I know
me.
who he is. Yeah. Oh, I see what you're saying.
I'm saying, but he was the person who told me right away that it was just like, you're never going to be actually over this. This will be with you, right? Mm-hmm. It'll be different. Some days will be good and some days will be bad. It'll be different, but it will be there, right? Mm-hmm. But that doesn't prevent you from living your life, and like you can build your life around that now, right? You know,
and it goes back to that whole thing of like shame.
Yeah.
The difference between shame is, you know, like I did this thing versus this is who I am.
Right.
And I think it becomes less of who you are and more of a thing that happened. Like there's no better story, I think, of this than Stephen Glass. Sure. Are you familiar? You're familiar with his story. Did you read the article in Airmail?
I did.
So who is Stephen Glass? To me, personally, he is the loving man who took care of his dying wife as the world was trying to crush him.
Yeah.
He loved her better than I see most people love anyone. That's Stephen Glass to me. Did he do something? Yeah. But who he is so different.
Yeah.
I mean, I feel blessed we got a chance to see a piece of that.
I mean, it sucked that story was behind a paywall, frankly. I mean, I think that the expiration date on like, you know, but I was like reading and I was just like, yeah, this is a life that was lived in a way that it was just, he's not thinking about that in that moment at all. He's thinking about how to be the best person and best man he could possibly be. And that's really it. And, you know, there are so many things that are bigger than public scandals or public shame. I wouldn't have known that at the time, but, you know, I think it's just because I'm doing a memoir, you know, getting paid for it. I don't make that face. You know,
what?
What? Well, I was just saying, I thought you were like looking at me kind of just like, you know, in a way, we're just like, no, you shouldn't do that.
No.
But it's interesting where, you know, because I got an offer to do one fresh out of court.
Oh, yeah.
And I did the proposal and everything like that. And I was like, oh, the whole memoir is basically how I got to where I am, and this is the end, and the ending is happening. And there was no, you know, I didn't know the end was actually the beginning at the time, right?
Yes.
That my life had yet to actually happen yet.
Yes.
But what's great is that, you know, the courtroom actual time about the trial or the whatever with Gawker is maybe where it was probably 10 chapters before, maybe one.
Right.
Now,
Right.
You know?
Yeah. If I rewrote my book right now, that would be one chapter of the book. The whole thing would be one chapter. And you know the funny part. So you were wondering what that look on my face was. It was way more self-centered than you might think. I was laughing to myself because I was like, I'm glad you took time to wait to write the memoir, because I was instantly jobless, needed to figure out a way to make some money. And then when the offer came for a book, I grabbed it and wrote it. So I now inscribe it, if someone asks for a signed copy, with the words, please don't read this book, Jason. So I'm glad you waited. That's exactly what was going through my head.
The other part of the interview we had from the last time that I've carried with me is you had this concept about calling people in as opposed to calling people out when it came to kind of public shaming in some ways, that I thought was a really interesting concept and a really beautiful one.
Yeah. Well, I think the underlying idea, right, is that if you jump back to the way that I was before my scandal, I was the one who knew all the journalism history, knew about all the major plagiarizers or people who had done things wrong, and I was highly judgmental of them. There was probably no one around that was more judgmental than me. And if you had asked me at the time, I would have told you, it's very important for us to know these examples so you don't end up in these situations, or that we can ferret out said people. I have learned.
I hope you're on the record with this at some point.
Oh, you mean the story? This part? Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah. I mean, I don't think I've probably told this much of it.
Right.
But, and I definitely haven't told this part of it. So years later, and looking back at the situation, I found out that I had two groups of colleagues, pretty much. I mean, I'm not being nuanced here, but two primary groups of colleagues. Colleagues who were watching me during the time going, oh shit, I'm really worried about him. How do we intervene? And some of them were talking to each other. And others who I think were way more hostile in a lot of different ways. And for the people who are hostile, I think having gone through it, there's, Schadenfreude, there's loving to watch other people fail. There are all sorts of things like that. And there are the people who are legitimately like, hey, we need to call this out for a warning sign. But in retrospect, I wish one group of people, the hostile group, was less interested in calling out for whatever emotional advantage they got. And I wish the other group wasn't afraid to pull me in.
Right.
And I think we need to spend more time focusing on the idea of how can we bring in people who are hurting? How can we bring in people who make mistakes instead of just calling them out? At the beginning, and I can give you an example of of a real story that has not broken. So somebody's investigating one of my former colleagues right now, digging into stuff, and gave me a call about it, about some particular stories. And I said, here's what I can tell you on background, but I'm not really going to help you out in this because, like, I feel like this person's going to get demolished. Very little good's going to come out of it. And you guys are not going to have care for the human being that exists afterwards. Anyway, we had lots of conversations about that. And hopefully I influenced said reporter to think of that. But I know the moment that story breaks, if it ever comes out, like, I'm not going to be a part of the judgmental crowd. I'm going to be a part of the crowd that makes the first call to try and reach out to be like, hey, you can make it through this.
Right. Well, why would you go on? Does the person know that you spoke to the reporter? The person that's being written about?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
And has that story come out yet?
Nope.
Can't wait.
For our PTSD. Seriously, when I first got the call, I was like, oh, do I have to? Because it evokes those same feelings.
Yeah.
It evokes those same feelings.
Right. Did you, when you read the Stephen Glass piece, did you watch Shattered Glass? Have you watched those sort of?
I have never seen the movie.
Yeah.
Yeah. I read his book. I've heard people describe the movie too. I've heard him, he and I, Bill Adair, who wrote the story for Airmail, he's a Duke University professor. He's been a journalist a bunch of different places, but we were the rotating speakers for his journalism class. So the two people he would bring in each year, and I've never met or talked to Stephen, but the one thing students told me when he was so remorseful and so sad when he would come and talk to them. So when I saw the Airmail story, I just thought to myself, like, man, you have nothing to be ashamed about.
Yeah.
Like, you are a better human being than most I know.
Yeah. Yeah. I find it interesting that you still speak, you say that about the journalism profession, you say we, right? That you still feel like a part of it. Yeah. Do you still consider yourself a journalist?
So it's been an arc on that front. The answer to your question, the straight answer to your question is yes. If you had asked me 2 years ago, I'd have been like, I would have told you, and my apologies to all the classes where I've said this, I would have told you, no, I am not a journalist. There are some sins that you may be able to be forgiven for, but because journalism is so based on trust, I can't be a journalist anymore. So, but then I accidentally became one again. I started this podcast because I wanted to help people. My goal was to just have conversations. It actually came out of an idea of a coach of mine who was like, you always say that you don't want a financial barrier to exist for people to get help, and you have these amazing conversations with people. Maybe you can have conversations with people on a podcast, and then it could get shared freely to anyone. And of course, knowing me, I told her she was crazy and that was the dumbest idea I'd ever had. And then 2 years later, I'm like, actually, this is a great idea.
Yeah.
So that's how it originally started. And then I was telling you the story about Rosemary Armao. I was on her podcast in October of 2023, and we were talking about all sorts of different things. And her final question to me was like, why did you decide to become a journalist again? And I was like, I haven't. It's a very funny moment. And she's like, yeah, you have. You sit, you interview people, and then you share the information. You're a journalist. And so I think I would have never intentionally set out to do it. But I think I just fell back into it because those journalism skills, the interviewing, the researching, they just come so naturally. So, I mean, what are we doing here right now?
Just chatting. I mean,
Yeah.
I don't call myself a journalist.
Yeah.
I don't. And part of the reason was I never really felt like one, even while I was doing it. And going back to my
that's
days
interesting.
as a local reporter, covering pie eating contests and zoning board meetings and things along those lines. My aspirations were to be a writer and whatever that meant. And journalism was kind of a bridge to whatever that world was. And then when I got to New York, as a trade reporter, and then alt weeklies, but I was mostly trying to be funny, sad essay guy. I was basically trying to rip off David Sedaris, whatever, and fell into blogging, and then Gawker, and then I think while I was there is when Gawker started to grow up a little bit and hire some more prestigious writers, and I had obviously had I knew how to do a story, I knew what was required.
So you tripped into it.
Well, I used to say that anytime I would break a story, I was kind of like cartwheeling through it the whole entire time because I didn't want to I didn't want that responsibility, right? It was easier for me to basically just I
don't want it to land.
Well, I didn't want to be kind of held to the same sort of rules and that was fine. I was fine being an outsider. And then, obviously when I'm getting sued in a big First Amendment case and I'm like, I have to pretend a little bit to be.
Did you really? You thought that?
I did.
That's really interesting because just thinking about your work before that. So, and I have a colleague at work who followed you long before that, like back in the Gawker days. Like I would have always considered you, and again, this is outside view. This is not what it felt like inside for you. I would have always considered you a journalist. And don't get me wrong, like you picked up on something, the we language. The we language for me did not start at that moment where Rosemary pointed out the very obvious. The we language has existed since. The difference is when I say we now, I'm less likely to catch myself and start crying.
Okay.
But I still do sometimes.
Interesting.
I still do. And I know how you feel about what you are is very important, but I would consider on the other end of this somebody who cares deeply about journalism. What's the point of it? It's the power to give people knowledge, the power to heal people, and the power to entertain people, which can be a transformative experience. You may not feel this is journalism, but I at least feel it has all the beneficial elements of the profession that I love and think is important.
Yeah, I don't love the profession. I think part of it is really and I don't know. Let me correct that. I would say that I still feel like I'm outside of the profession, and I was inside enough to know how things work a little bit. And I think because I had so many bad experiences talking to other reporters when I was the subject, that it may have left me on the other side, that the media is evil side a little bit more than is probably fair. But
there's some truths, just like politics, that it's not all wonderful, particularly, if you get into certain segments or corners of it. But I will tell you afterwards, as I'm being covered, I sort of felt like the media was evil. And I also saw flaws that I didn't see as an insider. My favorite, my absolute favorite collection of articles that I collected in the aftermath were stories about my plagiarism that plagiarized somebody else's story. Those were my absolute favorite.
Right.
So I'm not saying the experience didn't take a shine off of it a little bit, but I do think that it can have powerful positives, but it's up to the people. So with all your growth and your development and your experience sort of going through this humbling thing, I almost feel like I'm not saying qualified or not qualified. I'm saying I'd rather have somebody who thinks and has been through experiences like yours on the other end of the pen, because they're going to be compassionate. They're going to be thoughtful. They're going to see different elements of it. So if that makes sense.
No, it makes complete sense.
Yeah. I mean, part of journalism's challenge, and David Shribman, who is the Washington bureau chief of the Boston Globe, used to say this, is part of the problem with journalism today is so many people go through school, they hop right into it, they haven't lived life. They haven't been humbled yet. They haven't been crushed. They haven't been fired at least once. And by the way, David said to me long before the Times thing, he said, like, you're not really a journalist until you've been fired at least once.
Right.
And so
I have also maintained that, like, I think the clout chasing that existed in basically New York City media was something that, I participated in willingly, right? But I think that there was also something that was important more than anything, was that I think I realized a little too late that editors were more important than institutions. That the editors that actually embraced me and loved me were probably going to be a lot more beneficial to me than the institutions themselves. Because obviously, the industry is always going through a period of bad and terrible, financial problems, right? But the great editors that I've had the privilege of working with, I still work with in some capacity. I still am connected to. I'm still grateful for them. I still anytime I write something that I feel is important to me, I share with them, because that's something that I learned. The skills that I wanted basically came through people and not through, like I said, not through any particular place that I worked.
Well, so two great pieces of advice I got. One that I think helped me as I transitioned, because I remember, I can't remember whether it was right before the scandal or right before 9/11. I remember saying I was on the phone. I was in Brooklyn at Prospect Park on the phone with my mom, and my whole family was getting ready to go to vacation in Hawaii, right? And I said I was calling them to tell them I couldn't go on the vacation, and I got upset and I started crying, which back then wasn't as common as it is now. And she asked me what was wrong, and I was like, I just am not happy here. And she's like, well, you can go work somewhere else. And I was like, well, I'm in New York. I'm at the New York Times. There's nowhere else to go. And that's the way I honestly felt. But Jerry Gray, an editor of mine, smart, kind guy, he said two things. Don't ever let your last name become the New York Times.
Right.
You're Jason Blair. You're not Jason Blair from the New York Times. And the other piece of advice, he said, look, a newspaper is not going to hold you at night. It's not going to give you a hug.
Yeah.
And I think it's very true, and a hard thing for people in institutions in general. They're there for their mission. They're not there for us. But the people within those institutions can become, as I know to this day, some of the very important people in my life are people who worked with me in those institutions, who saw me as Jason, a human, and not a journalist, not a scandal, not a headline, not a whatever. Or maybe they did see those things, but they saw them all together.
Yeah, and I think that because it's very, and I think this is an important step in terms of just like your growth is like, wow, like I trust this guy implicitly with basically anything that I would ever want to share with anyone, because I believe that he's going to listen more.
Yep.
And I believe he's going to process it differently, as opposed to someone else who may take that and kind of look at it with a little bit of scorn and judgment and things along those lines.
Yep.
And that's a remarkable turnaround, right?
Yeah, and it is. And I mean, for the most part, it's a very good thing. It's very fascinating, though, because, going through what I've gone through, seeing my own behaviors, because one of the things about being in a scandal is like, you really do have to watch your behaviors afterwards. And by that, I don't mean like just policing yourself, but I mean like you're watching yourself in a way that other people don't watch themselves.
Yeah, that's so true.
Yeah. And one of the powerful things about this, sometimes I'm confronted by somebody, let's say within a friend group or some kind of community I'm a part of, doing something absolutely outrageous that would cause everyone to cut them off. And I look at it and I think, oh, yeah, I remember when I was like that in 2007 and this was going on. And I'm, like I had a therapist who once said, I used to come in and be like, am I a sociopath? And they'd be like, the exclusionary criteria for being a sociopath is caring about whether you are a sociopath. And I'd be like, do I have borderline personality disorder maybe? And, they'd be like, yeah, the behaviors that you're showing right now are a bit like that. But when someone's jacked up, like all of these things, all of these personality traits get maxed to the extreme and they look ridiculous. And that has given me a lens in my sort of like more settled, calm me to be able to look at outrageous behaviors for what they are. And that's a moment.
Yeah.
And that doesn't mean throw the person away. And it's cost me, is my point. It's cost me actually among my friends. How can you tolerate X person? Well, you know what? I can tolerate a lot. Been through a lot.
What did you learn through the whole entire experience? What is your takeaway now from like having gone through that? I'm asking you the same question that this woman asked me and trying to see.
What have I learned from that? Well, I think probably, the biggest thing for me, I don't know whether this is a life lesson so much as the biggest change. Like, the entire experience humbled me. I can say I would have hated to see the person that I would have become without having gone through that experience. And I don't mean just getting the mental health diagnosis. I was so arrogant and so resistant to feedback. I may have generally been a nice person, but I would not have had a nice impact on other people in the world. So if you ask me what I learned, it's not a set of facts, but I learned humility. It's something I did not know. I did not understand that,
Yeah. It's still a little abstract to me, not gonna lie. Like, what that, what does that mean to you?
The notion for me, at least I think one way to start is looking at the contrast for me. I think I was a very confident, very ambitious person. I still have confidence. I still have ambition. It's probably obvious to most people. But what I don't have is the arrogance, the belief that I can do no wrong.
Yeah.
And the belief that most people are more flawed than me. And I think I have, and I think that this is like, it's been the key thing to, I think, living in peace for me is having ambition at the same time, being humble enough to know that I don't have all the answers, that other people bring so much value to the world, that I'm not supposed to come up with the answers, that I am stronger because of the diversity of people around me. And I think a person who's not humble misses out on so much opportunity to get beautiful, wonderful things from other people. Like, you can go it alone. You will get the prize in the first place trophy if you win, but you'll probably be miserable. You'll probably be alone. And really, honestly, you probably won't win.
Right.
So that's the way that I kind of look at it. I mean, but there are other lessons probably that I've learned. And I think one of them is, honestly, that I don't need to be the best, that I don't need to be the best to feel good about myself. I don't need to be right to feel good about myself. And frankly, honestly, I don't need to be great at what I do to be loved. Because what I do, and I think that's another piece of it, what I do is not why people have loved me.
Yeah.
And I've realized that over time. Like, they've loved me for who I am, but I have associated their love of me with what I do.
I realized something while we're having this conversation, Because remember I said before that I don't consider myself a journalist, and that was kind of a choice I was making. It's not really because of any shame. Like I have kind of moved in the area of my life where I do feel like I'm more comfortable calling myself an artist than I am a journalist, right?
Yep.
However, when the National Magazine Awards just came out, I was like, man, I want one of those. I want one of those. I want one of those for all the wrong reasons, which is to basically prove everyone wrong and get that public validation, have other people read it and basically be really angry and hate their lives. So that part is still there. Before, I probably wouldn't have said it out loud. Now that I am therapized and on the healing path.
What you really need is you need to become the White House press secretary if you really want to piss people off. Journalists jumping off the side of cliffs.
Once you get a diagnosis, it feels like, oh, well, that makes sense, right? And there's some relief in that diagnosis, right? So knowing full well that, I've always had mental health issues that have never been kind of drilled down, but they've been there most of my life. And then recognizing the patterns in a lot of my behavior and my workplaces of work and in my friendships and my relationships, and always wondering why, just like I can't stop self-destructing in the same way every single time, right? And I think also believing that I was defective, right, and unfixable. But also wanting so badly to be loved on the other side of that and accepted, right? And I mean, that creates such chaos, right? And created such chaos. Now I can see both sides of it, but I also, I try to do this with myself is I really try to reparent myself, right? But like, as the drunk and drug addict and like the worst versions of me, right? And the guy right now, frankly, right? I mean, who still kind of can go into a little bit of self-flagellation and self-hatred and things along those lines. Because it's still hard for me to say that I love myself, right? I work at it, but getting a little bit better at it. It still makes me want to knock this microphone off right now after I just said that and cut that right out of there. But I mean, it's a goal.
Why do you think it's hard for you to say?
Because I think that the only thing that comes up when I say that I love myself is just like, oh, but I still have this list of amends that I have to kind of make to all these people that I haven't even remembered the bad thing that I've done to them.
But what does that have? Do you think your love for yourself is transactional?
Yes, 100%.
Okay. Maybe you should wrestle with that idea.
That's it. We'll save this for your show.
You may want to sit on that.
That was Jason. He's so solid. I'm so happy to have gotten to know him, and I genuinely like him. He's taken one of the lowest moments of his life, and he has generously used it to help others. That is the way out for most of us who suffer from big, enormous things and have had our lives upended by some thing, something big. So keep that in mind. I will also drop a link to Jason's consulting and life coaching services. So if you need him, contact him. This is the Small Bow Podcast. I'm your host, AJ Daulerio. We are produced by Lauren Tabak. If you love our podcast, you'll also love our newsletter. You can sign up for that at thesmallbow.com. Special thanks to Swamp Dogg for our music. He has a new album out called Blackgrass, which you can find everywhere you find music, or you can purchase a vinyl copy at ohboy.com. ohboy.com. Next time on the Small Bow Podcast, we have, holy shit, Joey McIntyre from New Kids on the Block. I know what you're thinking. This podcast is insane. It is. I love it. And thank you for your continued support of the Small Bow. Remember, a better way you can support our podcast is if you leave us a high rating with lots of stars on Apple. If you give us a great review, it shoots us up the charts, and then more people find us. Or you can tell everyone you know about the Small Bow Podcast. You can say something like, hey, did you know that there is a podcast about mental health and sobriety that no one knows about, but that everyone should be talking about? Just a suggestion. Again, we're trying to grow and we need your help to do that. Anything you can do to help, well, we'd love that. I love you. Thank you for listening. See you next time. Here's Swamp Dog.
Every way I know to keep you satisfied. In other words, I'll try to be everything you'll ever need. Hear me, baby. I'll try to be everything, oh, you'll ever need. I'm gonna be everything.
If you'd like to join us for more discussions with me and other listeners, we can be found on most social media platforms, including a listener-run Facebook group called the Silver Linings Fireside Chat. For deeper conversations with our guests and other conversations with listeners, and to support the podcast, you can also join us on our Patreon at www.patreon.com/The Silver Linings Handbook. Also, if you're interested in true crime, come over to Substack and check out our new publication with Brett and Alice from the prosecutors called The True Crime Times. I'm Jason Blair, and this is a Silver Linings Handbook bonus episode. We'll see you guys all again soon.